Most food is produced by people who don't know where it's going and eaten by people who don't know where it's from. But we seem to be okay with that. 48% of Americans actually have no interest in knowing where their food comes from. So it should come as no surprise then that 7% of Americans think chocolate milk comes from brown cows. Yes, 7%. And that may not seem like a big number, but it adds up to 16.4 million. 16.4 million people, likely some of whom you know, believe that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. It's just painful. Now, that may seem utterly ridiculous, but to be fair, there are some brown dairy cows out there, so I have to admit that it doesn't not. Some chocolate milk probably does come from brown cows, but I don't even know where I'm going with this. Let's just roll the intro and maybe I'll get a hold of myself. The global food and beverage industry is worth about $6 trillion. In North America, that's about $1 trillion, and 5 to 15% of that is spent on marketing. The first thing ever traded was food. Food was the very beginning of the economy. Yet most people throughout most of history have been on the brink of starvation most of the time. It wasn't until the 1980s that most people had reliable access to safe food most of the time. So don't get me wrong, the modern food industry is absolutely miraculous. It's incredible, and it's tragically broken. The big food conglomerates have accomplished a freaking miracle with their role in making more safe food more available and more inexpensive to more people than ever before in human history. On the other hand, much of that food is nutritionally impoverished and leaves unspeakable swaths of environmental devastation and cruelty in its wake. It turns out that the cheaper we eat, the sicker we get. So this might sound weird for me to say, but I deeply admire what big food business has done, while I'm also existentially terrified of what they're doing. Their marketers don't just sell the food, they sell the story around the food. People like to be told how and why to use a product, food and otherwise. Think about literally every single online recipe you've ever seen. There's always a big story before the actual recipe, right? I mean, we want the story. Just like Homo erectus 2 million years ago, we still like a good story with our food, except now the story is about you and your identity, how great you are. And if you aren't, then how this product is going to make you great and make you somebody in an increasingly alienating world. It's as if we already have an innate understanding of the thesis of this channel, or at least a perverted version of it. The food promises to make you who you want to be and who you wish you were, but the promise is a lie. No wonder we have so many eating disorders. We use the product only to find ourselves in the same state as we were before. Alone. Pay attention to the ads the next time you watch TV. Notice how many of them show someone eating alone or just getting through their day. I'll give you a hint. It's never. It's always a party. It's always your family, your love interest, your community, your extremely cool circle of friends, or when it's not, it's just you and your burger, alone in your private universe like a pair of lovers dancing the night away at the ball, entwined like Cinderella and Prince Charming. And as if to add insult to injury, what's the next ad? Medicines to treat the disorders brought about by bad food choices, if not in the physical realm, then in the psychological, because despite eating all the candy and cereal and soda and wholesome chicken, we're still the same person we were before, and the slow drip, drip, drip of disappointment and loneliness gnaws at us until finally we need medication for that too. Point is, they're selling you the food second and the story first. They're selling a sense of belonging, of status, self-worth, security in the tribe. And we get hooked early. A kid in the 1960s saw about 1,500 ads per day. Today it's more like 15 to 30,000. An ad is probably the first thing you see in the morning on your phone and the last thing you see at night, often for food. A lot of those messages come courtesy of the same people who were selling cigarettes to kids in the 90s. When the lawsuits put a big fat dent in the cigarette business, those folks who had perfected the art of selling poison to children didn't just go away. They simply applied their skills to the poisons that were still legal. A lot of the money that left the tobacco industry just made a minor pivot to the processed food business. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, right? And like so many of our vices, we have a love-hate relationship with food. You can observe that in any bookstore. Cookbooks here and diet books right over here. This aisle has books about things to eat, and the next aisle has books about how to avoid them. Same way the TV has a commercial for processed food, followed by commercials for drugs to fight diabetes, heart disease, and obesity. We love to go shopping and fill our carts with all the wonderful things that make us happy, but then 50% of it gets thrown away. The food industry has figured out how to extort us via our most important primordial bodily function. They represent some of the loudest voices who are weaponizing your hopelessness. They want you to give up. They send lobbyists to Congress to do everything they can to convince you that there's nothing that can be done, but it's not true. There's a lot that can be done. You are not helpless, and I am not hopeless. I'm actually more optimistic than I've ever been because we have cracked the code. We change the food, we change the world. We can lay an irresistibly delicious path to denihilism, and that's how we break their hegemony, and it needs to be done. They have not been good stewards of our health, of our farmers, of the environment, nor fair economic playing field. I remember being a teenager walking through the grocery store and noticing that only a few brands were represented, and most of what they were selling was junk. I wanted to know how that happened, so I've been looking into that story ever since. And it turns out it started a long time ago, which is why I've already devoted at least 2 videos to the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution resulted in people working longer hours for less nutritious food and leading less interesting but longer lives. We have more minutes and fewer moments. We know more about each other and less about ourselves. And somehow that's normal because it's all we've ever known. It's just the same as the processed food I grew up on. By the time of my childhood, industrialized food had become the norm. It was pretty much all I had ever known. Every now and then I got to go to my grandma's farm and had a chance to eat something fresh, something real. And when I did, what do you suppose happened? Did the angels sing and lift the veil from my eyes? Nope, I hated it. I didn't like fresh beans because they were crunchy. I didn't like fresh lettuce because it was bitter. I didn't like fresh tomatoes because they tasted like tomato. I didn't like fresh milk because it tasted like milk. And I had only ever known the processed, mass-produced, bland versions of those things. I had only ever known what Michael Pollan so astutely calls food-like substances. I was a product of my age. The industry made the food, and then the food made me. But the takeaway is not that the processed industrial food tasted inherently better or worse. The point is that our cravings will follow our habits, regardless of what those are. Nutritionists have a couple of interesting terms to describe how we respond to new foods. A neophilic person is open to trying new things, while a neophobic person would rather just eat the things they're familiar with. Evolution selects for both neophilic and neophobic behaviors depending on the circumstances. My favorite example is about 115,000 years ago when climatic changes pushed all the humans to the coastal regions of Africa where sea levels had risen, creating conditions favorable to shellfish. Now, because those same climatic changes had made their old food sources more scarce, the people were faced with 2 choices: learn to like shellfish or starve. Well, it's not hard to figure out that the neophobic people of that time died off while the neophilic people thrived. So while neophilic behavior can make the world of eating more interesting and maybe even save your life, it's not our default predisposition. Our overwhelming behavior as hunter-gatherers was to obey our habits. In a world where a lot of things can make you very sick or kinda dead, it's safer to eat the things you know because they won't poison you. And when our bodies need a certain nutrient, they signal us with cravings, just like we talked about in the flavor video. The food marketers have us figured out. It's easy to make us curious about a new fun food, but our grocery carts tend to be filled mostly with the same things we always buy, including our favorite junk foods. The process of processing junk food results in byproducts. The food industry subsequently figures out ways to turn those byproducts into new kinds of junk food. New yet familiar. You can have the exciting new thing and rest assured that a team of food scientists has designed it to fit perfectly into your very predictable palate. And there's an irony in there too, because thanks to global distribution networks, we can explore flavors from cultures on the other side of the globe. Anytime I want, I can have kimchi from Korea, kefir from the Caucasus, coffee from Costa Rica, Gouda from Gelderland, cuy from Cusco, or, well, maybe not cuy. But the thing is, you get the point. Everybody having access to everything means our tastes are becoming more similar. So in a world where we can get anything, we kind of just want the same thing. Globalization is bringing more diverse flavors to more places while at the same time homogenizing and kind of flattening out our preferences. And as much as the climatarian crowd would like people to eat more locally and more seasonally, we just can't help it. We want strawberries at Christmas. We want chocolate in Minnesota. We want ice cream in Phoenix, sushi in Denver. We will never get to a place where we're all eating locally and seasonally, and that goes for most climatarians as well. On the other hand, that's great news for people who work in the shipping industry and the packaging industry. If you want Ethiopian coffee tomorrow, well, there's a whole network of people who each made a little money bringing that to you, and that's generally thought of as good for people. I mean, that is if you like people to have jobs and that sort of thing. It also brings us closer together in a way. You may not like the idea of once local cultures being infiltrated by the homogenizing monster that is KFC, and I personally would agree with you. On the other hand, I can, at any time I want, get an incredible oyako donburi or a bowl of ramen to knock your socks off. I can have just that one snippet of understanding of people who live nearly as far away from me as one can get on our ever-shrinking globe. In other words, we are at once curious but predictable and essentially lazy. There are for most people 4 considerations when choosing a food: cost, health, effort, and enjoyment. And in turn, eating is one of the things people most enjoy in life, yet we don't want to work too hard at it. Cooking has become a spectator sport, which brings us one step closer to life itself becoming a spectator sport. We eat frozen dinners while watching our competitive cooking shows. From a marketing perspective, we are low-hanging fruit, sitting ducks, fish in a barrel, easy pickings, cherry-picked small fry, suckers, candy from a baby, and they do sell us pablum. Sometimes it can feel like the consumer is the David to the food marketer's Goliath, but it's actually the other way around. We just don't know it. The consumer packaged goods industry is so incredibly tough with razor-thin margins, fickle trends, new competitors, and an increasingly cynical and demanding and educated consumer base. Trust me, it's they who are desperate to court us. All this greenwashing you see, food that pretends to be sustainable or environmentally friendly, brown wrappers with pictures of green trees and words like natural and heart healthy. You know what I'm talking about. You see it all the time. Using labeling and buzzwords to make something look healthier and more sustainable than it really is called greenwashing. I find it incredibly annoying, but it also just tells me that they know we want them to be more ethical. All the convoluted and spurious health claims are just proof that they know we understand the relationship between food and health. The current wave of food activism, our current revolution, it's working. And that greenwashing is the proof of that. Greenwashing costs money, but they do it. Why? Because they know it's what we want. The food giants are facing a new challenge with the current food revolution. How do they maintain dominance when the trend is toward more whole, healthy food and more sustainability, more focus on unprocessed, more focus on local? We need to keep the pressure on, keep demanding healthier, more sustainable food. Yes, they will dream up new ways to cheat and trick us, but that's just how the game is played. They can either up their game or pretend they do. Either way, it's an admission that our preference for better food motivates and intimidates them. Don't ever let anybody weaponize your hopelessness. You have the upper hand. And there's a $90 billion industry out there to prove it. We can change the world by paying attention and letting them know we're paying attention. You do that by voting with your dollars and voting with your forks. Reward businesses that do good. You don't have to be perfect and you don't have to be an angel, but buying just that one item from a regenerative farm makes a little difference, and trust me, the bean counters know it. So every time you see a brown wrapper with green ink packaging an imposter, that's your proof that we have the upper hand. That hopelessness so prevalent these days, it's part of their strategy, so don't fall for it. Eat something delicious and you win. It turns out that your life is the best tool you have for improving your life. It turns out that the best tool we have for fixing the earth is the earth itself, and it starts with food. Eat something delicious and you win, because you make the food and then the food makes you. Speaking of winning, I forgot to do a giveaway last week, so this week we'll do something extra. The first person to list a reason why they like a particular food, any food, will win a piece of Eat Is Love swag of your choice. By now you've seen the whole lineup, and if you haven't, shame on you. Go back and watch all my videos, and then you'll get to see what we got. There's coffee mugs, kitchen towels, coasters, aprons, and I don't know what else. Maybe that's it. But anyway, be the first person to go to the comments field and write the reason you like a particular whatever food you want. And you'll get your choice of any of those and you'll get your choice of any one of those merches. How do you say that? Merchandises? Merchy. Anyway, I've been advised to say that this is only available to people over 18 who live in the lower 48 of the US. Otherwise, the shipping would just be too expensive. But for now, it's time to wrap up this video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you again next time. Ciao.